The silence of the Manhattan business tower after midnight was a living thing. It was a pressure in the ears, a heavy blanket woven from the absence of 1,000 ringing phones, a million frantic keystrokes, and the ceaseless hum of ambition. For 15 years, James Washington had been the sole custodian of this silence. He moved through the cavernous halls and glass-walled offices not as a man but as a ghost. His presence measured only by the gleam of polished mahogany and the scent of lemon wax that greeted the masters of the universe each morning. Tonight, the silence felt different. Colder. More absolute. He was on the 24th floor, the domain of Sterling Industries' legal department, buffing a floor so reflective it felt like skating on a frozen night sky. His movements were a practiced meditative rhythm, a dance he knew by heart. Mop bucket buffer. The simple, honest tools of his trade. They were predictable. They were reliable. They were everything the world above him was not. It was a flicker of light from above that broke his rhythm. An anomaly. The 25th floor, the executive suite, was meant to be dark. It was the lair of the dragon, the throne room of the queen herself, Victoria Sterling. By this hour she was always gone, whisked away in a black town car to a penthouse that likely had more square footage than the entire floor James lived on. He paused, the buffer humming softly at his side. He was not paid to be curious. Curiosity was a luxury for the people who wore $1,000 suits, not the man who cleaned up their coffee spills. For 15 years he had followed the rules. Stay on your designated floors. Use the service elevators only. Do not engage with the executives unless directly addressed, which had happened a grand total of 3 times. Twice to be told he'd missed a spot, once to be asked where the men's room was by a summer intern who had mistaken him for a piece of the furniture. But the light stayed on. And through the vast cathedral-like atrium that connected the floors, he could see movement behind the frosted glass walls of the main boardroom. A single silhouette pacing. "Let it be jammy," a voice whispered in his memory. Dorothy's voice. Warm, pragmatic, and always, always right. Not your circus, not your monkeys. He smiled faintly. Dorothy had had a saying for everything. She had been a nurse, a 20-year veteran of the neurology ward at Chicago General, and she viewed the world through a lens of symptoms, diagnoses, and prognoses. She had seen true crisis, the terrifying fragility of the human brain, and it had left her with little patience for the manufactured dramas of the corporate world. He tried to heed her ghostly advice. He went back to his buffer, pushing it across the glossy floor. But his eyes kept drifting upward. The pacing of the silhouette had stopped. It was hunched over now, motionless at the head of the long, imposing conference table. Something was wrong. The instinct was primal, a cold knot tightening in his gut. It was the same feeling he'd gotten the day Dorothy had called him from the hospital, her voice unnaturally calm to tell him she'd been in a fender bender and that he shouldn't worry. She had died 2 hours later from an internal hemorrhage the first responders had missed. He abandoned the buffer. The rules be damned. He moved to the service elevator, the grimy, rattling cage that was his vertical domain. He rode it to the 24th floor's service closet and let himself out, his soft-soled work boots, making no sound on the plush gray carpet. The main elevator bank with its gleaming brass doors was for them. But James knew the building's secrets. He knew about the override code for the executive lift, a code meant only for fire emergencies. Dorothy had always said that knowledge was the one tool no one could ever take from you. He punched in the code. A soft chime answered, and the doors to the executive elevator slid open with a whisper. The interior was all polished cherry wood and soft recessed lighting. It smelled of expensive perfume and leather. He felt like a trespasser in a holy place. As the elevator ascended, a wave of profound unease washed over him. This was a violation. A man like him did not belong here. He was the invisible janitor. His job was to erase all trace of his existence before the sun rose. When the doors opened on the 25th floor, the silence was even more profound. This was the summit. The air was thinner up here, rarefied. He crept toward the boardroom, his heart a heavy, muffled drum against his ribs. The glass walls were tinted, designed to give an impression of transparency, while maintaining a shield of privacy. From the hallway, he could see her clearly, Victoria Sterling. He had seen her face on the covers of magazines in the building's lobby. A face of sharp angles, intelligent eyes, and a mouth that seemed permanently set in a line of determined impatience. She was a legend, a corporate titan who had inherited a struggling manufacturing company from her father and forged it into a global technological powerhouse. Now that powerful figure was slumped against the mahogany table that cost more than his car. Her head was down one hand, clutching a phone, the other arm hanging strangely limply at her side. She was trying to speak into the phone, but the sounds that came out were guttural, slurred, a garbled stream of noise. Her face, usually a mask of composed authority, was twisted in a grimace of pain and terrifying confusion. James froze. The world narrowed to that glass wall to the woman inside. And Dorothy's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, urgent bell ringing in his head. "Look at the face, Jamie." One side drooping, a classic sign. He saw it. The slight, almost imperceptible sag on the left side of Ms. Sterling's mouth. "Check the arms. Ask them to raise both arms. If one drifts down..." Her left arm was useless, a dead weight. Listen to the speech, slurred, incomprehensible aphasia. He couldn't understand a word she was saying. Facial droop. Arm weakness. Speech difficulty. FAST. The acronym Dorothy had drilled into his head over countless dinners using breadsticks to demonstrate neurological pathways. "Time is brain jammy," she would say, her eyes intense. "Every second that passes, more brain cells die. There is no room for hesitation. Not for a janitor, not for a king. A stroke doesn't care who you are." He was the invisible janitor. She was Victoria Sterling. Their worlds were not meant to intersect. He was supposed to clean her office, not save her life. He thought of the warning on his locker he'd received last year for simply using the executive restroom when the one on his floor was out of order. What would they do to him for this? But then he saw the panic in her eyes, the sheer naked terror of a mind trapped inside a body that was suddenly, inexplicably betraying it. It was the same terror he had seen in the eyes of Dorothy's patients, in the eyes of his own wife in those last fleeting moments. In that instant, there was no CEO and no janitor. There was only a human being in desperate trouble and another human being who knew how to help. He pushed the heavy glass door open. It swung inward with a silent hydraulic sigh. Victoria Sterling's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear fixed on him. She tried to say something, "Get out, who are you?" but it came out as a mangled vowel. James kept his voice low and steady, the way he'd heard Dorothy speak to frightened families 1,000 times. "Ms. Sterling, my name is James Washington. You're having a stroke. Don't try to talk. Just listen to me." His calm authority, so at odds with his gray janitor's jumpsuit, seemed to cut through her panic for a second. He moved to her side, his steps measured and sure. He gently took the phone from her spasming hand and placed it on the table. He was already dialing 911 on his own cell phone. "Yes, I need an ambulance at the Manhattan Business Tower, 25th floor. Sterling Industries." His voice was a clear, concise report. Female patient, mid-40s, presenting with classic stroke symptoms. Unilateral facial paralysis, weakness in the left arm, and severe slurred speech. Onset of symptoms was approximately 5 minutes ago. He could hear the operator's surprise on the other end of the line. "Sir, are you a medical professional?" "No, ma'am," he said, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. He carefully eased her from her position, slumped over the table into a seated position on the floor, leaning against the table's base, making sure her head and neck were supported. "I'm the janitor." He stayed on the line, providing updates, his voice a steady anchor in the terrifying storm that had engulfed Victoria Sterling's world. He could see her trying to fight, trying to regain control, but her body would not obey. Tears of frustration and fear welled in her eyes. He met her gaze and held it. "They're on their way, Miss Sterling," he said softly. "You're not alone." The paramedics burst in 10 minutes later, a whirlwind of blue uniforms and clattering equipment. They saw the scene, the janitor kneeling beside the CEO in the billion-dollar boardroom, and their expressions were a mixture of confusion and urgency. "What happened here?" The lead paramedic asked, his eyes dismissing James as he moved toward Victoria. James stood up, giving them space but holding his ground. Suspected ischemic stroke. Sudden onset 5, maybe 10 minutes ago. She was conscious and attempting to speak on the phone, presented with left side facial droop, left arm paralysis, and expressive aphasia. No visible trauma. "I positioned her to maintain airway and prevent falls." The paramedic stopped short. He looked from the incredibly detailed, accurate report to the man in the janitor's uniform. He exchanged a baffled glance with his partner. You did this." "My wife was a neurologist," James said simply, as if that explained everything. They went to work with practiced efficiency, and James stepped back, his job done. He watched as they loaded Victoria Sterling onto a gurney, a tangle of wires and tubes now connecting her to their life-saving machines. As they wheeled her out, her eyes found his for a fleeting second. In them, he saw not the powerful CEO, but a frightened woman, and something else. A flicker of dawning, bewildered gratitude. The frantic energy vanished with the ambulance, and the profound silence of the tower rushed back in to fill the void. James was alone again in the grand empty boardroom. The air still crackled with the aftermath of the crisis. He felt a tremor in his own hands, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its wake. He was just a janitor, a ghost. He should go back to his buffer on the 24th floor. He should disappear. No one even had to know he was here. But his eyes fell on a small object on the floor near the leg of the chair Victoria had been sitting in. It must have fallen when he helped her to the ground. It was a small enameled pin glinting under the recessed lights. He bent down and picked it up. It was beautifully crafted, a tiny stylized bird, a raven maybe, with a sliver of sapphire for an eye. It was elegant but deeply personal. It didn't look like corporate jewelry or a branded accessory. It felt out of place with the severe, calculated image of Victoria Sterling. He turned it over in his palm. It felt heavy, important. Instinctively, without knowing why, he slipped it into his pocket. That's when he heard the sound. It wasn't the tired shuffle of another night shift worker. It was the sharp, commanding cadence of expensive leather shoes on marble coming down the hall from the main elevator bank. The footsteps were fast, too fast for a casual stroll. They were purposeful, angry. James's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. It was the sound of authority, the sound of trouble. It was the sound of Wilson Carter, the head of security. James's heart, which had been steady through the medical emergency, began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He was in the one place he was never ever supposed to be. He had broken a dozen rules, and the man approaching was the one who had written them. The footsteps stopped just outside the boardroom door. The silence stretched for a single, agonizing second. Then the chrome handle began to turn. The man who filled the doorway was built like the granite pillars in the building's lobby. Wilson Carter was immaculate even at 3 a.m. His suit was a shadow, perfectly tailored, his tie a tight, merciless knot at his throat. Not a single silver hair on his head was out of place. He radiated an aura of cold, compressed power. His eyes, the color of chips of ice, swept the room, taking in James, the empty gurney space, and the single, overturned water glass on the floor, before finally settling on James with an unnerving intensity. Washington. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that was accustomed to instant obedience. What is the meaning of this? James felt the instinctive urge to shrink back, to become the invisible man he was paid to be. But the image of Victoria Sterling's terrified eyes and the echo of Dorothy's steady voice held him firm. He met Carter's gaze. "There was a medical emergency, Mr. Carter," James said, his voice even. "Miss Sterling collapsed. I called 911. Carter took a step into the room. The scent of his cologne, something sharp and spicy, invaded the sterile space. "I am aware of the call. I want to know what you were doing on the 25th floor. Your designated area for this shift is 23 and 24. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Carter's concern was not for his boss's health, but for the breach of his meticulously crafted security protocols. James noted the speed of his arrival. The paramedics had taken 10 minutes. Carter had arrived in less than 5. He must have been close, or he had been alerted the second the executive elevator was activated with the override code. "I saw the lights on, sir. I saw her fall through the glass," James explained, keeping his answers short and factual. There was no one else here. "So you took it upon yourself to use the emergency override on the executive lift, enter a restricted area, and interfere with a senior executive." Carter's words were like precisely placed stones building a wall of culpability around James. "I was rendering aid, sir. You are a janitor, Washington. You are paid to clean floors, not play doctor." The contempt in his voice was undisguised. He walked over to the table, his polished shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He ran a finger over the spot where Victoria had been slumped as if checking for dust. "The paramedics handled the situation. Your presence here was a violation of company policy. A serious one." "Understood, Sir," James said. There was nothing else to say. Arguing would be like reasoning with a storm. This man's world was made of rules and hierarchies, and James had just shattered them. Carter's icy eyes narrowed. This entire incident is under review. You will return to your duties. You will not speak of this to anyone. Is that clear? Yes, Mr. Carter. Get out. James turned and walked out of the boardroom, the weight of Carter's glare on his back. As he rode the rattling service elevator back down to the 24th floor, the cold dread in his stomach had nothing to do with medicine. Wilson Carter was not just a security chief enforcing rules. He was a predator whose territory had been invaded, and in his eyes, James had not seen concern or annoyance. He had seen fury, pure, controlled fury. The next evening, the warning was waiting for him. It was a single sheet of paper taped precisely to the center of his locker door in the staff changing room. The crisp, impersonal font of a laser printer seemed to shout from the page, "Official warning, breach of corporate protocol." The document detailed his transgressions in cold bureaucratic language. Unauthorized access to a restricted executive zone. Misuse of emergency elevator systems. Unwarranted engagement with a C-level executive during a private medical incident. It was a masterpiece of corporate speak, expertly twisting an act of human decency into a list of criminal offenses. The final sentence was the most chilling. Further violations will result in immediate termination and potential legal action. It was signed by Wilson Carter. James carefully peeled the paper off his locker. The other night shift workers averted their eyes, pretending to be busy with their own lockers. But he could feel their stares, feel the ripple of rumor and speculation. The janitor who saved the CEO. The janitor who was now apparently in a world of trouble. He folded the paper calmly and put it in his pocket. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. 15 years of flawless service, of quiet, invisible work, erased by one night of doing the right thing. But what truly disturbed him wasn't the warning itself. It was the motive behind it. Why would Carter go to such lengths to punish him? Why try to intimidate the one witness to Victoria Sterling's collapse? A hero janitor was good press, good for company morale. A punished janitor was a loose end being aggressively tied off. Dorothy's voice returned to him this time from a memory of a long-ago argument she'd had with a dismissive doctor. When the story doesn't make sense, Jammy, she had fumed later that evening, it's because someone is selling you a lie. The story didn't make sense. For the rest of the week, James worked with a new, heightened awareness. He was no longer just a janitor, he was a spy in his own workplace. His invisibility, once a simple fact of his station, was now a tool. He watched, he listened, and he saw things. He saw Dr. Patterson, Victoria's personal physician, arriving at the tower twice in 3 days. The man looked like a bundle of frayed nerves. His face was pale, his movements jerky and agitated. He wasn't visiting the 25th floor where his patient's office was. He was going to the 20th to Wilson Carter's security headquarters. James made a point of cleaning the corridor outside Carter's office during both visits. Through the sliver of glass not covered by the blinds, he saw the two men in what appeared to be a hushed, frantic argument. He couldn't hear the words, but the body language was a universal language of fear and coercion. Dr. Patterson gesticulated wildly. Carter stood like a monolith, his expression cold and unyielding, occasionally placing a heavy, placating hand on the doctor's shoulder that looked less like a gesture of comfort and more like a threat. The pieces were not fitting together. They were clashing, grinding against each other with a soundless, awful friction. A powerful CEO has a stroke. The head of security, instead of being grateful to the man who saved her, punishes him. And the CEO's own doctor seems to be taking his orders from the security chief. The memory that finally unlocked the door in his mind came on a rainy Sunday afternoon, not in the gleaming tower, but in the quiet of his own small apartment. He was dusting a photograph of Dorothy, her smile wide and brilliant. The repetitive motion, the familiar scent of lemon polish transported him back to their kitchen years ago. It had been a similar rainy Sunday. Dorothy had been at the kitchen table, a medical journal open before her, her brow furrowed in anger. She'd been so incensed she could barely speak. "It's criminal, Jammy. Absolutely criminal," she had said, stabbing a finger at a page. He had sat down across from her, and she had told him about a case she'd been asked to consult on. A female CFO at a major tech firm, a woman in her late 40s known for her high-stress, high-performance lifestyle. For 6 months she had complained of persistent headaches, dizziness, and episodes of confusion. Her doctors had run basic tests, found nothing conclusive, and diagnosed her with executive burnout. They prescribed sedatives and a vacation. 2 weeks later, she had died of what the coroner ruled a massive stress-induced heart attack. Stress-induced. Dorothy had scoffed, her voice dripping with scorn. That's what they write down when they're too lazy or too arrogant to look deeper. I reviewed her files, her toxicology reports. There were faint traces of something barely detectable. Oleandrin, a cardiac glycoside. In small repeated doses, it mimics the symptoms of extreme stress. It causes dizziness, confusion, headaches. Over time, it weakens the heart muscle until, bang, it just gives out. It looks perfectly natural. You mean she was murdered? James had asked, shocked. She was poisoned. Dorothy corrected, her eyes flashing with a righteous fire that James had loved. Slowly, methodically. And her own doctors helped the killer by slapping a convenient label on her symptoms. They called her hysterical jammy, dismissed her complaints because she was a powerful woman under pressure. But poison doesn't care about your job title, and the people who use it, she had said, her words etching themselves into his memory, they count on everyone else seeing stress instead of a crime. James stood in his apartment, the dust rag still in his hand, the photograph of his wife before him. The memory washed over him like an icy wave. Headaches, dizziness, confusion, all dismissed as stress. He thought of Victoria Sterling, another powerful woman in her 40s, under immense pressure. He thought of Dr. Patterson, the dismissive physician. He thought of Wilson Carter, the man who wanted to silence the only witness. He thought of the pin in his pocket, the strange little raven that felt like a secret. A hypothesis cold and terrifying began to form in his mind. What if Victoria Sterling's stroke hadn't been a stroke at all? The call came the following afternoon. He was cleaning the windows in the main lobby when one of the receptionists called his name. James Washington, there's a call for you. She pointed to a house phone, her expression a mixture of pity and curiosity. He picked up the receiver. This is James. Mr. Washington. The voice was female, crisp and professional. It was the voice of the 25th floor. Please hold for Ms. Sterling. He held his breath. This was it. The axe was about to fall. He was going to be fired over the phone by the CEO's assistant. But the voice that came on the line next was not the assistant's. It was deeper, a little hoarse, but utterly unmistakable. It was the voice of Victoria Sterling. Mr. Washington, I'd like to see you in my office, at your earliest convenience. The line went dead. The walk from the lobby to the 25th floor was the longest of his life. This time the building was vibrantly alive, a hive of activity. Men and women in expensive suits and dresses rushed past him, their faces set with purpose, their conversations a buzz of mergers, acquisitions, and market shares. He was a ghost among them, his gray jumpsuit a mark of his invisibility. They didn't see him. They never had. He stepped out of the executive elevator and into the quiet, plush reception area of the executive suite. The assistant, the one with the crisp voice, looked up and her polite smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She recovered quickly. Mr. Washington, Ms. Sterling is expecting you. Please go right in. He pushed open the heavy oak door to her office. It was a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the city. Victoria Sterling was not behind her massive desk. She was standing by the window looking out at the sprawling metropolis she had conquered. She was dressed not in a severe power suit, but in a simple, elegant cashmere sweater and slacks. She looked paler than he remembered and thinner, but her eyes, when she turned to face him, were sharp and fiercely intelligent. Mr. Washington, thank you for coming, she said, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs that faced her desk. Please sit. He sat on the edge of the chair. It probably cost more than his monthly rent. I wanted to thank you personally, she began, her voice formal. The doctors at the hospital were very clear. Your quick actions saved my life. They said whoever provided the initial aid knew exactly what they were doing. She paused, studying his face. The paramedics mentioned your wife was a neurologist. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. She taught me a few things. She taught you well, Victoria said. A brief, genuine flicker of warmth crossed her face before the cool mask of the CEO returned. She walked around her desk and sat opposite him, folding her hands on the polished surface. The distance of the desk felt like a chasm between their two worlds. I owe you a debt I can never truly repay, she said, and I will see to it that you are properly rewarded. But first... She leaned forward slightly, and the formality in her voice evaporated, replaced by something raw and urgent. Her eyes locked onto his. I have a strange question for you, James. A question I can't ask my doctors or my board or anyone in my life. She took a quiet breath. In your informal opinion, did my symptoms seem natural to you? The question hung in the impossibly clean air between them, a bridge of words spanning the vast canyon that separated the janitor from the CEO. It was a test. More than that, it was a plea. Victoria Sterling, a woman who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single utterance, was asking him for the truth because she was no longer certain she could find it on her own. James felt the weight of his position, the precariousness of his life. The safe answer was to defer, to mumble something about being just a janitor, and that she should trust her doctors. It was the answer Wilson Carter would expect him to give. It was the answer that would allow him to collect his paycheck and fade back into the shadows. But he thought of Dorothy. She had never once in her life given the safe answer when a patient's well-being was on the line. She had challenged senior doctors, questioned established protocols, and fought for the people nobody else would fight for. To give the safe answer now would be to betray her memory. He met Victoria's intense gaze and chose his words with the care of a man disarming a bomb. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and steady. "My wife used to say that medicine is about patterns. Most of the time the pattern is obvious. A cough is a cold. A fever is an infection." He paused, letting the silence draw her in. But sometimes the pattern is wrong. The symptoms fit, but the story doesn't. She saw cases that looked like stress, that looked like exhaustion, but were something else entirely. The pattern was a mask, hiding something more deliberate. He didn't need to say more. He saw a flicker of understanding and stark fear in her eyes. She knew exactly what he was implying. She leaned back in her chair, the movement slow, almost weary, as if the confirmation of her deepest fears was a physical weight. For the past 6 months, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I've been telling myself it was the pressure. The new product launch in Asia, the fight with the board over the R&D budget. It was easy to blame the job." She looked out the window at the city below. "The headaches started first, like a vice tightening around my skull. Then came the dizziness. I almost fainted in a meeting in Tokyo. My team caught me. We called it jet lag." Her gaze returned to him, sharp and analytical again. "I had moments of confusion, forgetting a name I've known for 20 years, losing my train of thought mid-sentence. Each time it happened, Dr. Patterson was there to reassure me. 'Victoria, you're burning the candle at both ends,' he'd say. He was so reassuring, so patronizing. She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a small amber-colored prescription bottle. He prescribed rest. And these. She slid the bottle across the polished desk. James didn't need to pick it up. He could read the label from where he sat. Advanced Wellness Formula. Executive Blend. Vitamins, Victoria said, her voice laced with a new, hard-edged bitterness. He told me they were a high-potency vitamin blend to combat stress and improve cognitive function. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. Dorothy's story about the poisoned CFO, the convenient diagnosis of stress, the dismissal of legitimate neurological symptoms, and now a custom-blended bottle of vitamins from the very doctor who seemed to be in league with the head of security. It was a perfect, self-contained system of attack masked as care. Ms. Sterling, James said, his voice quiet but firm. "I think you need to stop taking those." "I came to the same conclusion this morning," she replied, her knuckles white as she gripped the arm of her chair. "Since I was discharged from the hospital, I haven't taken them. And today is the first day in months that my head has been completely clear." The admission seemed to shock even her. "I feel awake." A new cold fury began to replace the fear in her eyes. "Wilson Carter was in my hospital room before my own sister was. He was talking about enacting the emergency succession plan, about stabilizing the company. He seemed disappointed when my doctor said I would make a full recovery. Here it was. The moment of truth. Victoria Sterling was isolated at the top of her own empire, surrounded by smiling predators. She didn't know who to trust, her doctor, her head of security. The two people charged with her physical well-being and safety were the very people she now suspected of trying to murder her. And so she had turned to the only person who had no agenda, no ambition, no reason to want her gone. The ghost in her machine. "I need help, James." She said the words stripped of all pretense. It was a raw, direct admission of vulnerability. I am surrounded by people who I pay to protect me, and I believe at least one of them is trying to kill me. I can't go to the police yet, not without proof. An accusation like this could destroy the company. It would be my word against a respected doctor and my decorated head of security. She leaned forward again, her eyes boring into his. They don't see you. To them, you are furniture. A shadow on the wall. They would never suspect you. I need you to be my eyes and ears. What do you need me to do? James asked. There was no hesitation. He had crossed the line the moment he stepped into the boardroom. There was no going back. Watch them, she said, her voice hardening with strategic resolve. Carter and Patterson. Watch their routines, who they meet with, what they do, where they go. Report everything to me and only to me. Use this. She slid a small, sleek burner phone across the desk. It's untraceable. The only number programmed in it is mine. Do not use your own phone. Do not speak to anyone else about this. As far as the world is concerned, you are the janitor who got lucky, and I am the grateful CEO who is sending you a fruit basket. They already see me as a threat, James said, thinking of the warning on his locker. Carter is watching me. That's why you must be perfect, Victoria countered. Be the best, most invisible janitor this company has ever seen. Do your job so well that no one has any reason to look at you twice. Your invisibility is now your most important weapon. Use it. James took the phone. It felt impossibly heavy in his hand. I will. He left her office a few minutes later, the burner phone in his pocket, alongside the strange raven-shaped pin. As he walked back through the bustling corridors, he felt a profound shift in his own existence. He was still a ghost, but now he was a haunted one tasked with a purpose that was as terrifying as it was necessary. The investigation began that very night. James transformed his routine into a meticulous intelligence-gathering operation. His cleaning cart was no longer just a cart. It was a mobile observation post. His knowledge of the building, once a simple requirement of his job, was now a strategic map of the battlefield. He knew the camera blind spots, the delivery schedules, the exact time each department head left for the night. He focused on Carter and Dr. Patterson. He logged their movements in a small coded notebook he kept hidden in the sole of his work boot. Dr. Patterson visited Carter's office on the 20th floor 3 more times that week. James made it his business to be buffing the floor at the far end of the hall each time. He quickly noticed a crucial damning detail in the pattern. On the rare occasions Dr. Patterson had come to the 25th floor to see Victoria, he carried a soft traditional leather doctor's bag. It was the kind of bag a family physician might carry on a house call. But when he went to see Wilson Carter, he carried something entirely different. It was a hard-shell aluminum briefcase with 2 combination locks. It looked more like something a courier carrying sensitive documents would use than a doctor. He never brought that briefcase to Victoria's office. He only ever brought it to Carter. The briefcase became an obsession for James. It was the vessel of their conspiracy. What was inside it? Drugs, documents, money. He knew the only way to find out was to get inside Carter's office. But the office was a fortress. Carter was the head of security. His domain was protected by state-of-the-art systems. James bided his time, waiting for an opportunity, a mistake. The break came on a Friday night, nearly 2 weeks after his meeting with Victoria. Carter was a man of rigid routine. He left the office every night at 7 p.m. on the dot. But on this night, James overheard him telling his secretary he had to leave early for a charity dinner. He was gone by 5:30. This was a disruption in the pattern, and Dorothy had always taught him to pay attention to disruptions. At 2 a.m., when the tower had fallen into its deepest silence, James rode the service elevator to the 20th floor. Carter's office was dark. James set about his work cleaning the surrounding offices, first establishing his normal presence on the floor. Finally, he arrived at Carter's door. He swiped his all-access janitorial keycard. The light on the lock blinked green and the door clicked open. The office was as immaculate and severe as the man himself. Everything was black-gray and chrome. Not a single paper was out of place on his vast desk. James went through the motions of his job, emptying the main trash can. It contained exactly what he expected: junk mail, a newspaper, a discarded memo. Benign. But James had been a janitor for 15 years. He knew how people hid things. His eyes scanned the room looking for anything out of place, and he found it. Tucked away under a side credenza, almost completely hidden in shadow, was a small personal office shredder. His heart began to beat faster. This was wrong. Sterling Industries had a strict policy implemented by Carter himself that all sensitive documents were to be placed in locked blue bins for professional on-site shredding and incineration by a bonded security team. The use of a personal shredder in an executive office was a direct violation of that policy. It was the act of a man who had secrets he didn't even want his own security teams to see. He knelt beside it. The wastebasket attached to it was small. He pulled it out. It was filled with a confetti of cross-cut paper shreds. It would be a nightmare to try and reconstruct, but not impossible. A surge of pure adrenaline shot through him, sharp and electric. This was it. This was the break. He had to get these shreds out of the office. His mind raced. He couldn't just carry the basket out. There were cameras in the hallway. He looked at his cleaning cart. The large, opaque gray bag in the main bin was filled with the day's legitimate trash from a dozen other offices. It was the perfect cover. With trembling hands, he carefully upended the shredder's small basket into the very center of the large trash bag on his cart. He then covered the pile of telltale confetti with other garbage paper towels from a washroom, a discarded newspaper burying the evidence in plain sight. He slid the empty basket back into place, wiped his prints from the machine, and finished his cleaning of the office, his every motion now screaming with tension. He felt as though Carter could walk in at any moment. He pushed his cart out of the office, the door clicking shut behind him with a sound of utter finality. As he rolled the cart down the silent, empty corridor, the soft rustle of the shredded secrets hidden among the coffee grounds and discarded memos was the loudest sound he had ever heard. Every camera felt like an eye boring into his back. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with the terrifying weight of what he had just done. He had crossed a final line. He was no longer just an observer. He had stolen the enemy's secrets. James's small apartment became a sanctuary and a war room. After his shift, under the solitary glow of the lamp in his kitchen, he carefully emptied the contents of the plastic bag onto his table. The pile of cross-cut confetti was a mountain of secrets, a language he did not understand. It seemed like an impossible task. He worked with the patience of a man who had spent 15 years polishing the same square feet of marble. Using a pair of tweezers his wife had used for her model shipbuilding hobby and an old magnifying glass, he began the painstaking process of reconstruction. The first few hours were an exercise in pure frustration. The tiny diamonds of paper mocked him, offering up meaningless slivers of text, a single, the half of an, and a fragment of a corporate logo. Exhaustion gnawed at him, but he pushed on, fueled by coffee and the cold, hard conviction that the truth was hidden in this paper chaos. Dorothy had loved puzzles. She would have seen this not as a chore, but as a challenge, a diagnosis waiting to be made. He channeled her focus, her refusal to be defeated by complexity. Around the 5th hour, just as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through his window, he found his first breakthrough. He managed to connect 3 pieces that formed a single horrifying word: toxicology. A few minutes later, he assembled a fragment of a letterhead from a high-end medical laboratory in New Jersey. He worked with renewed urgency. The puzzle began to yield its secrets piece by tiny piece. He found a sliver with Victoria's last name Sterling next to a patient identification number. He found another with a line of figures indicating a blood potassium level, a critical indicator of heart function. Next to the number, scrawled in a sharp, impatient handwriting, were 3 letters, AWNL, adjust to within normal limits. It was a command, a direct order to falsify a medical result. The final damning piece fell into place just as the sun rose. After hours of effort, he pieced together 4 shreds that formed a single terrifying word from the lab report's substance analysis section, digitalis. It wasn't oleandrin, the poison from Dorothy's story, but it was in the same family. A cardiac glycoside. A drug used to treat heart failure, but one that, when administered in slow, careful doses to a healthy person, was a potent cumulative poison. It would cause exactly the symptoms Victoria had described. It would weaken the heart, and it would eventually lead to a massive, fatal cardiac event that would look entirely natural to an unsuspecting coroner. James leaned back in his chair, his entire body aching. The shredded paper was no longer a puzzle. It was a death warrant. He now had physical proof of falsified medical records intended to hide a deliberate slow-motion murder. But as the initial rush of discovery faded, a cold reality set in. This proof was fragile. It was circumstantial. He had stolen it. He could never take it to the police without implicating himself and revealing his connection to Victoria. Carter would paint him as a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. They needed more. They needed something undeniable. They needed to hear the conspirators confess with their own mouths. The conclusion was obvious. He needed to get a listening device into Wilson Carter's office. And that was a task far beyond the skills of a janitor. He needed a specialist. He needed an ally. For the next 2 days, James observed the building's maintenance staff with a new purpose. He needed someone with technical skill, someone who operated with discretion, and most importantly, someone who was not a company man. His thoughts kept returning to one person, Marcus Johnson. Marcus was a decade younger than James, a wiry coiled spring of a man who handled the building's complex HVAC and electronic systems. He was an Army veteran, something James had gleaned from the faded 101st Airborne patch on the tool bag he sometimes carried. He was quiet, but his eyes missed nothing. He moved with the efficient, no-nonsense grace of a soldier, a stark contrast to the sluggish pace of the other Union maintenance workers. Most importantly, James had once seen Marcus in a quiet but firm standoff with one of Carter's overzealous security guards who had tried to write him up for propping open a fire door while hauling heavy equipment. Marcus hadn't raised his voice, but he hadn't backed down either. He had a core of steel beneath his quiet exterior and a clear disdain for petty tyranny. He was the one. Recruiting him would be the biggest risk yet. James planned his approach carefully. He found Marcus during his lunch break not in the crowded staff cafeteria, but in the rumbling quiet of the sub-basement boiler room, his preferred spot for solitude. He was sitting on an overturned bucket, eating a sandwich and reading a paperback. "Marcus," James said, his voice calm. Marcus looked up, his eyes immediately wary. He was not a man who liked surprises. "James." "What's up, clog on 20? "No, I need to talk to you. Off the record." Marcus's posture shifted. He closed his book and gave James his full attention. The lazy lunchtime air suddenly felt charged. What kind of off the record? This was the moment of truth. James decided that beating around the bush would only insult the man's intelligence. He had to make a leap of faith. "It's about what happened to Miss Sterling," James said, keeping his voice low over the hum of the machinery. "And about Wilson Carter." Marcus's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of interest lit his eyes. "I heard the rumors. That you were the one who found her." "I did. And I was punished for it," James said. "Carter is trying to bury what happened. I think he has a reason. I think he and Ms. Sterling's doctor are involved in what happened to her." Marcus listened, his face unreadable. He took a slow bite of his sandwich. "That's a heavy accusation, man. Carter basically runs this place. You're talking about career suicide. Maybe worse." "I know what I'm talking about," James said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic baggie containing the most legible of the reconstructed fragments, the one with the lab's letterhead, the word toxicology, and the handwritten command to AWNL. He handed it to Marcus. Marcus took the baggie. He looked at the fragments, his brow furrowing. His eyes, accustomed to reading complex wiring diagrams, traced the lines of text. He was silent for a full minute. The easygoing maintenance worker was gone, replaced by a sharply focused analyst. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice now a clipped, serious whisper. "Carter's personal shredder." Marcus let out a low whistle. He looked from the evidence to James's face, a new respect dawning in his eyes. This wasn't some crazy old janitor spinning conspiracy theories. This was real. "So the rumors are true," Marcus said, more to himself than to James. "They're trying to sweep you under the rug." He handed the baggie back. His decision was made. Attempted murder and large-scale financial fraud. That's what this smells like. They're trying to incapacitate her to take over the company. He had connected the dots with military speed. "I need your help," Marcus, James said. "I have the motive. I need the method. I need proof that can't be denied. I need to get a bug into Carter's office." Marcus's face broke into a grim, thin smile. "Carter runs a weekly electronic sweep of the executive floors every Tuesday. Standard corporate counter-espionage. Placing a bug a 5-year-old could find is a fool's errand. But he stood up, his brake forgotten. He's arrogant. His sweeps look for radio frequency transmitters. He's not looking for a hardwired microphone run through the building's own infrastructure. He's looking for spies outside, not ghosts inside. In that moment, a partnership was forged in the rumbling heart of the skyscraper. They met the next day at a greasy spoon diner miles from the city center. Over coffee, Marcus sketched a plan on a napkin. The sweet spot is the HVAC system, he explained. There's a primary air duct that runs directly over his office. The vent is right above his desk. I can install a high-gain microphone inside the duct, wire it using the existing thermostat control lines, and run it to a recorder I can stash in a service closet 3 floors down. It's untraceable by a standard sweep. But first I need to get in there and take a look. I need to see the layout. The plan was as elegant as it was dangerous. They set the reconnaissance mission for the following afternoon, a time when the office floors were busy and a maintenance worker checking on the air conditioning would go unnoticed. Marcus created a fake work order in the system citing temperature fluctuations on the 20th floor. It was the perfect cover. The next day, James positioned his cleaning cart at the end of the corridor, acting as a lookout. He polished a window that was already gleaming his stomach, a tight knot of anxiety. He watched as Marcus, tools in hand, greeted Carter's secretary with a nod, pointed to the ceiling, and got to work. Marcus popped a ceiling tile and effortlessly hoisted himself up into the darkness of the crawlspace. James's heart pounded. He went back to his polishing, his ears straining for any sound. Above the ceiling, Marcus moved like a cat. The space was tight, a maze of pipes and wires coated in a thick layer of dust. He followed the main ductwork until he found it, the large insulated tube running directly over Carter's office. He crawled to the vent and peered down through the grate. The view was perfect. He could see the entire expanse of Carter's desk, his computer, his private phone line. This was the spot. He was taking out a small digital camera to snap a few pictures of the layout when he heard it. The sound of the office door below clicking open. Marcus froze, every muscle in his body tensing. He pressed himself flat against the ductwork, trying to make himself smaller to stop breathing. Through the grate, he saw the top of Wilson Carter's perfectly coiffed silver hair enter the room. He was not alone. Dr. Patterson scurried in behind him, looking even more nervous than usual. They had been so careful. They had chosen a time when Carter was scheduled to be in a meeting across town. The meeting must have been canceled. Marcus was trapped. He was lying directly above the 2 most dangerous men in the building. He prayed they wouldn't look up. He prayed a tool wouldn't slip from his belt. He held his breath, the dust in the air tickling his nostrils. The voices drifted up through the vent, clear and sharp in the enclosed space. It was Carter who spoke first. His voice a low, angry growl that carried an unmistakable edge of menace. "The timeline has to be accelerated," Carter hissed. "Sterling is recovering too quickly. She's asking questions. The board is getting nervous." Trapped in the suffocating darkness of the crawlspace, Marcus Johnson knew the true meaning of silence. It was not the absence of sound, but the overwhelming presence of it. The frantic thunder of his own heart. The rasp of his breath held tight in his chest, the creak of a pipe settling somewhere in the building's metal skeleton. Every noise was a potential death sentence. Below him in the pristine chrome and glass office, Wilson Carter and Dr. Patterson were mapping out a murder, and Marcus was their unwilling audience. "I'm telling you, it's too risky." Dr. Patterson's voice drifted up through the vent, thin and frayed with panic. He was pacing, Marcus could tell by the shifting sound of his footsteps. "Her system is already saturated. We increase the dosage now, and even a basic toxicology screen will light up like a Christmas tree. They'll find the digoxin, Wilson. We can't risk it." Carter's voice, in contrast, was a low, steady anchor of pure menace. He hadn't moved from behind his desk. "And I'm telling you, the greater risk is inaction. She's meeting with the board subcommittee on the Asian expansion project tomorrow. She's sharp again. Too sharp. Someone might start listening to her. The window of opportunity, the one we've spent a year creating, is closing. But a second fatal stroke so soon after the first is a tragedy," Carter cut in, his voice smooth as polished stone. "A terrible, tragic consequence of a brilliant woman pushing herself too hard. It's the perfect narrative. The media will eat it up. It will be a national conversation about executive stress. While everyone is wringing their hands, The emergency board, which I will be chairing, will stabilize the company and incidentally approve the acquisition of OmniGen Tech. There was a moment of silence. Marcus could picture Patterson wringing his hands, sweat beading on his forehead. Don't lose your nerve now. Dr. Carter's voice turned silky, the threat wrapped in a thin veneer of reassurance. You've come too far to develop a conscience. Think of your debts. Think of what happens if I release the file on your little problem in Vegas. Patterson stopped pacing. The capitulation was as loud as a gunshot. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice weak. The new batch of vitamins I gave you, Carter said. Replace her current bottle with it tonight. The formulation is 50% stronger. It will induce arrhythmia within 48 hours. It will look like a complication from her previous event. It will be clean. And by the end of the week, we will be in control. He paused, then his voice became almost congenial. And you will be a very wealthy man. Our initial investment in Blackwood Holdings has already quadrupled in anticipation of the OmniGen deal. Once the acquisition is complete under our leadership, you won't have to practice medicine a day more in your life. Blackwood Holdings. The name echoed in the dusty darkness where Marcus lay. A shell corporation. The financial motive laid bare. Do it tonight, Dr. Carter commanded. No more delays. Marcus heard the rustle of clothing, then the office door opening and closing. Patterson was gone. He weighted his muscles, screaming in protest for what felt like an eternity. He counted to 500 twice before he heard Carter finally move from his desk and leave the office. Even then, he waited another 10 minutes, the silence stretching his nerves to their breaking point before he dared to move. He slid out of the ceiling with the stealth of a snake, replacing the tile without a sound. He gathered his tools and ran out of the corridor, nodding to Carter's secretary as he left. He didn't allow himself to breathe freely until he was in the rattling cage of the service elevator, plunging back into the building's grimy underbelly. He found James in the boiler room waiting. The air was hot and thick with the smell of oil and metal, but it felt safer than the rarefied atmosphere of the 20th floor. Without a word, Marcus relayed the entire conversation, his memory honed by years of memorizing patrol routes and radio codes, replaying every syllable with perfect accuracy. James listened, his face a stoic mask, but his eyes grew colder with every word. When Marcus finished, James reached into his pocket and pulled out the small enameled pin he had found in the boardroom. He held it out in his palm. A tiny black bird with a sapphire eye. A raven. Blackwood Holdings. James said, his voice barely a whisper. A raven lives in a Blackwood. Marcus stared at the pin. It's a long shot. It's all we have, James said. And we have less than 48 hours. While James and Marcus were sealing their alliance in the bowels of the tower, Victoria Sterling was sitting in a sterile beige waiting room 300 miles away in Philadelphia. She was wearing a simple pair of jeans, a nondescript sweater, and glasses she didn't need. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was registered under the name Catherine Kane, and her file said she was a freelance graphic designer. The anonymity was both unnerving and liberating. Here she was not a CEO. She was just another patient, another name on a list waiting to be called. For the first time in years, no one was looking at her. No one wanted anything from her. No one was trying to anticipate her next move. They simply ignored her. It gave her a taste of the invisibility that James must live with every day. She had chosen the clinic carefully, one renowned for its diagnostics department and run by a Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman whose reputation for brilliant no-nonsense medicine was legendary. When her assumed name was finally called, she was led into an examination room that was as functional and unpretentious as the waiting area. Dr. Thorne entered a few minutes later. She was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the Catherine Kane persona. So Dr. Thorne began looking at the intake form. You've been experiencing headaches, dizziness, and some cognitive fog, and your personal physician prescribed you this. She picked up the amber bottle of vitamins that Victoria had placed on the counter. She unscrewed the cap and sniffed the contents, her expression skeptical. An executive blend. How very chic and utterly meaningless. Let's run a full blood panel and a comprehensive toxicology screen. I want to see what's really in your system, Ms. Kane. The wait for the results was agonizing. Victoria returned to her anonymous hotel room, the quiet pressing in on her. She was a woman used to constant motion, to a schedule filled to the second with meetings and decisions. Now there was nothing to do but wait for a truth she already suspected, a truth that would upend her entire world. Dr. Thorne's office called her back the next morning. The doctor would like to see you in person to discuss your results, the nurse said, her voice carefully neutral. Victoria sat in the same examination room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dr. Thorne entered holding a file. She did not smile. She closed the door, and her first words were not a diagnosis, but a question. "Who are you, really?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. "And who is trying to kill you?" The directness of the question struck Victoria with the force of a physical blow. All pretense fell away. "My name is Victoria Sterling." Dr. Thorne nodded slowly, as if that explained everything. "I thought you looked familiar." "Ms. Sterling, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Your blood is clean in most respects, but the toxicology screen found something deeply disturbing. You have a significant concentration of digoxin in your system." "Digoxin?" "It's a digitalis extract," the doctor explained, her voice all business now. "A cardiac glycoside. In controlled doses, we use it for heart failure. In uncontrolled doses, especially in a healthy person, it's a poison. It's subtle. It builds up over time. It causes arrhythmia, headaches, confusion, vision disturbances. All the symptoms you've described. The stroke you suffered wasn't a stroke. It was an episode of acute digitalis toxicity. Your heart was thrown into chaos." She opened the file and showed Victoria the lab report, a sheet of paper filled with numbers and medical jargon. She pointed to a specific line. "The therapeutic range for digoxin is 0.5 to 2.0 nanograms per milliliter," Dr. Thorne said. "Your level is 3.5. That is a lethal concentration, Mrs. Sterling. It is a miracle you survived the first episode. Another one would be fatal. I also had the lab analyze the contents of this bottle." She gestured to the vitamins. "Each capsule is laced with a significant dose of the drug." Victoria stared at the report, at the black and white numbers that spelled out the calculated, methodical attempt on her life. It was one thing to suspect, to feel it in her gut. It was another to see it laid out in the cold, irrefutable language of science. The betrayal was absolute, a chasm opening up beneath her feet. Dr. Patterson, the man who had been her family's physician for 30 years, the man who had given her lollipops after her childhood vaccinations, had been patiently, systematically poisoning her. The fear was a cold, metallic taste in her mouth. But as she sat there, another feeling began to rise up, hot and powerful, burning away the shock. It was fury. A cold, crystalline, all-consuming rage. The fear was the victim's emotion. The fury belonged to the CEO. She was not a victim. She was a fighter. She had built an empire by destroying her rivals and outthinking her enemies. These men had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated her. They had thought she was just another pawn in their greedy game. She stood up, her movements precise and controlled. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor, "I need a copy of this report, and I need to know if there is an antidote." "We can treat it," the doctor said, already understanding the shift in her patient. "Chelation therapy. It will flush the substance from your system. But you need to be admitted immediately." "I can't," Victoria said. "Not yet. The men who did this think I am still sick and weak. I need them to keep thinking that for a little while longer." She walked out of the clinic with the lab report in her purse, a declaration of war. Back in her hotel room, she finally took out the burner phone James had given her. It felt solid. Real, the one honest thing in a world of lies. She dialed the only number stored in its memory. He picked up on the second ring. Hello. James's voice was a quiet anchor. "James, it's Victoria." There was a pause on the other end. "I was in Philadelphia." She continued, her voice as cold and clear as glass. "I saw a doctor." "You were right. The lab results just came in. They're not just letting me die." She stared out the window at the unfamiliar city skyline, her reflection a pale, determined ghost in the glass. "They're actively killing me." She let the words hang in the air for a moment, sealing their terrible truth. "The game has changed. I'm coming back to New York tonight. We're going to burn them to the ground." The meeting took place in a place of ghosts. It was a cavernous, disused warehouse owned by Sterling Industries on the Red Hook waterfront, a relic from the company's early days as a shipping and logistics firm. The air inside was thick with the scent of cold river water, ancient brick dust, and the ghosts of a million forgotten cargoes. Light struggled through grime-caked clear-story windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in long cathedral-like shafts. This was a place off every map, a corner of Victoria Sterling's empire that had been forgotten by time, making it the most secure conference room in all of New York City. She was there first, a solitary, sharply defined figure amidst the decaying grandeur. When James and Marcus arrived, they saw not a victim, but a general surveying her battlefield. She turned as they approached, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a cold, controlled fire. The three of them stood in a circle under a bare, dangling light bulb, the billionaire CEO in a severe wool coat, the ex-soldier maintenance tech in his work-worn jacket, and the janitor who had brought them all together. The sheer improbability of their alliance hung in the air. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. There was no preamble. "Let's not waste time. Dr. Thorne's report confirms systematic poisoning using a digitalis compound administered through these." She placed the amber bottle of vitamins on a dusty crate that served as their table. "Marcus, your turn?" Marcus, who had been visibly tense in the presence of the legendary CEO, straightened up. The soldier took over. He gave a concise military-style briefing of the conversation he had overheard, detailing the plan to induce a final fatal arrhythmia, the mention of OmniGen Tech and the shell corporation Blackwood Holdings. When he finished, James spoke for the first time, his voice quiet, but carrying immense weight. He placed the small raven pin next to the bottle of pills. "Blackwood," he said simply. Victoria stared at the two objects on the crate, the instrument of her murder, and the symbol of its motive. "My God," she whispered. "It was right there in front of my face." The pin had been a gift from a junior board member, a young man Carter had been mentoring. It was all connected. "So the timeline is active," Victoria stated, her gaze hardening. "Patterson is supposed to swap the bottles tonight. We have to assume he'll succeed." "We can stop him," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Call the cops. Have him picked up." "No," Victoria said, her voice sharp as breaking glass. That's what they would expect. An accusation from a hysterical, recovering executive. Carter would disavow everything. He'd paint Patterson as a lone actor, a deranged doctor. He'd walk away clean. The charges against Patterson would get tangled in court for years, and I'd look like I'd lost my mind. The board would oust me within a month. She began to pace, her footsteps crunching on the gritty floor. "We can't just get them arrested. That's a legal battle. I want a public execution. I want to utterly destroy them with evidence so complete, so undeniable that Wilson Carter's name becomes a synonym for treason in the corporate world for the next century." This was the CEO James had only ever seen from afar, a master strategist now planning the most important campaign of her life. "Carter's arrogance is his weakness," she continued. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone. He thinks I'm weak, that James is stupid, and that he has Patterson completely under his thumb. We'll use that arrogance as the bait for our trap. The annual shareholders meeting is in 10 days, she announced. That will be our stage. It's the one event Carter can't control, where the entire financial world will be watching." The plan began to take shape, built from the pieces of their combined unique knowledge. "I will become the person they expect me to be," Victoria declared. "Starting tomorrow, my health will appear to decline rapidly. I'll be unfocused in meetings. I'll cancel appointments. I'll let a rumor slip through a trusted source that I'm considering taking a medical leave of absence." "That's the bait," Marcus said, catching on. "You make him think his plan is working perfectly. He'll get overconfident. It will also prompt him to make his final move on the market," Victoria added. "He'll leverage everything he has to buy up more OmniGen stock through Blackwood Holdings before the price skyrockets after the acquisition. My financial team, the only people besides us that I trust, will track every single transaction." "But it's not enough," James interjected quietly. "It's still circumstantial. A good lawyer could argue he was just a savvy investor." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "We need the smoking gun. We need a direct link between Carter and the poison. The original, unaltered lab reports. His correspondence with Patterson. We need to get inside their digital fortress." Their collective gaze fell upon James. He was the key. "Patterson is the weak link," James stated. It wasn't a guess. It was a character assessment based on years of quiet observation. He's not a killer. He's a coward who got in over his head. His entire life is on his computer. He's meticulous with his records. If the real files exist, they're on the desktop in his consulting office on the 25th floor. "Can you get access?" Victoria asked. "He has a routine," James explained. "Every Wednesday afternoon he comes in to update his files. He spends about an hour at his desk, but at some point He always walks down the hall to the executive lounge to get a specific type of coffee. He's a creature of habit. He leaves his office for maybe 5 minutes, and he never locks his door. He thinks he's safe up there. Marcus's eyes lit up. 5 minutes is an eternity. It's more than enough time to install a hardware keylogger. I can put it on a USB drive, disguise it with a logo from a medical software company. You plug it in, it installs the software in less than 30 seconds, and you walk away. The moment he types his password, it will send it to a secure server I control. I'll have complete remote access to his machine. The plan was elegant, audacious, and rested entirely on the shoulders of the man they once considered invisible. "I'll do it," James said, his voice betraying no hint of the fear coiling in his stomach. The following Wednesday arrived cloaked in a tense, unnatural calm. Marcus had given James the device that morning. It was a simple black flash drive no bigger than his thumb, with the logo of a prominent medical diagnostics company professionally printed on its side. It looked utterly benign. As James began his afternoon shift, the 25th floor was a low hum of quiet, powerful activity. He pushed his cart, his movements deliberate and slow, his mind a whirlwind of timing and risk. He felt the weight of the flash drive in his pocket, a small piece of plastic that held the key to their entire operation. At precisely 2:45 p.m., just as James had predicted, Dr. Patterson stepped out of the elevator. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. He nodded curtly at the executive assistant and disappeared into his small, private consulting office. The clock began to tick. James cleaned the glass walls of a nearby conference room, his reflection a blurry gray ghost against the Manhattan skyline. He watched the door to Patterson's office, his senses on high alert. He could feel the stares of the assistants, the executives walking by. To them, he was just the janitor buffing away smudges. He had never felt more visible in his life. 20 minutes passed, then 30. James was beginning to think the routine had changed, that their chance was lost. Then at 3:22 p.m., the door opened. Dr. Patterson emerged holding an empty mug. He looked up and down the hall, then headed toward the executive lounge, just as James knew he would. His footsteps faded down the corridor. This was it. The window was open. It would not stay open for long. James's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, to not risk it, to remain the ghost. But the image of Victoria's face, pale and betrayed, and the memory of Dorothy's righteous fire pushed him forward. He abandoned his cart by the conference room door. He took a steadying breath, his hand closing around the cool, smooth plastic of the USB drive in his pocket. He walked the 10 paces to the doctor's office, each step feeling like a mile. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside the world, narrowing to this single terrifying task. The computer was on the screen, glowing with a patient file database. The USB port was right there, an open invitation. He had seconds, not minutes. With his back to the door, he reached for the drive, his fingers slick with sweat. The grand ballroom of the Hilton felt like a theater set for a royal funeral. Hundreds of shareholders, their faces a mixture of anxiety and avarice, filled the rows of seats. The air was thick with the scent of money and fear. On the brightly lit stage, a long table was set for the board of directors, a silent row of judges waiting for the drama to unfold. At the back of the room, standing by the service exit, James Washington watched his janitor's uniform, rendering him as invisible as a shadow on the wall. This was the stage they had built, and the final act was about to begin. A hush fell over the room as Victoria Sterling made her entrance. The effect was masterful. She leaned heavily on an elegant but severe-looking cane, her steps slow and deliberate. Her makeup was expertly applied to make her look pale and drawn, with dark, hollow circles under her eyes. Every movement seemed to cost her a supreme effort. She was the very picture of a brilliant leader crumbling under the weight of her own body's betrayal. Wilson Carter was at her side, a study in predatory concern. He guided her to her chair with a proprietary hand on her elbow, his face a mask of solemn sympathy for the shareholders to see. He took his seat beside her, radiating a smug, confident energy. He believed he was moments away from claiming his kingdom. He glanced out at the crowd, then gave a nearly imperceptible nod to Dr. Patterson, who was seated in the front row, sweating profusely in the cool, air-conditioned room. Miles away, in a nondescript cargo van parked in a loading zone with a clear line of sight to the hotel's communication arrays, Marcus Johnson was at the heart of his own silent theater of war. The van's interior was a nest of wires and glowing screens. 2 laptops were open, one running a program that monitored the hotel's network traffic, the other primed and waiting. A high-gain antenna on the roof was aimed like a rifle. This was his command center. The trap was set. All he needed was for the target to step on the trigger. The meeting began. Victoria, as CEO, was scheduled to give the opening remarks. When she rose to the podium, she seemed to sway for a moment, gripping the lectern to steady herself. Her voice when she spoke was thin and reedy, a pale imitation of its usual commanding tone. "Good morning," she began, her words slow. "I thank you all for being here. It has been a challenging year. A challenging few months for me personally." As she spoke, her rambling, unfocused sentences, Dr. Patterson, sitting in the audience, nervously pulled out his tablet. He had just received a text from Carter. "She's fading. Get ready." He needed to review the falsified medical summary one last time before Carter called on him to present it. He tapped in his username and then his password to the company's secure medical data portal. In the van, a small, unobtrusive alert box popped up on Marcus's screen. Keystroke log captured Patterson Med 1 Cal. "Got you, you son of a bitch," Marcus whispered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. The password was the key. He dove past the portal's firewall, a ghost in the machine. He was inside Patterson's private network drive. It was a maze of standard patient files, but Marcus ignored them. He was looking for something hidden. He initiated a search for encrypted folders created in the last year. One result came back. A folder named with a breathtaking lack of imagination contingency. It was protected by a second, more complex layer of biometric encryption. But Marcus was prepared. The keylogger had done more than just capture passwords. It had planted a back door. He bypassed the encryption with a series of commands and the folder opened. It was all there. The real lab reports showing Victoria's perfect health before the poisoning began. A separate, meticulously kept calendar detailing the dosage schedule. And the crown jewel, a chain of emails between Patterson's private account and a shell account used by Carter. The words scrolled up on Marcus's screen, a litany of pure evil. "Carter, the dosage is not working fast enough. Increase it." Patterson, "I must protest, this is too dangerous." Carter, "You will do as you are told, doctor, or your wife will learn about your gambling debts, and the medical board will learn about your prescription fraud. We are in this together." Marcus began packaging the files, his heart pounding with triumph. He uploaded them to a secure cloud server and sent the encrypted link to a single recipient, the presentation laptop sitting on the stage of the Hilton Ballroom. On stage, Victoria was wrapping up her pathetic speech. As she did, she saw her loyal CFO in the third row subtly tap his ear, the prearranged signal. The bait had been taken. Victoria's leak about stepping down had panicked Carter. Blackwood Holdings had 10 minutes ago leveraged all its capital to purchase a massive final block of OmniGen tech stock at its current price. Carter was now financially all in. His escape routes were closed. Seeing the signal, Carter stood, his face a perfect blend of sorrow and strength. "Thank you, Victoria," he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity. He gently guided her back to her chair and took her place at the podium. "My friends, my fellow shareholders," he began. "It is with the heaviest of hearts that I stand before you today. You have all just seen what I have been forced to witness in private for months. Our brilliant leader, our visionary CEO, is unwell. Her health is tragically failing her." He let the words hang in the air. In this time of uncertainty, the company needs strong, stable leadership. Therefore, I must, for the good of Sterling Industries, propose to the board an emergency vote to appoint a temporary CEO to guide us through this difficult transition. He had made his move. The trap was about to spring. Victoria, who had been slumped in her chair, a portrait of defeat, slowly straightened her spine. Then, with a sudden, sharp movement, she let go of her cane. It clattered to the floor of the stage, the sound as loud and shocking as a gunshot in the silent room. A collective gasp went through the audience. She stood up unaided. She seemed to grow taller, her posture infused with a sudden ferocious energy. She walked to the podium, her steps firm and powerful, and stood beside the stunned Wilson Carter. "Thank you, Wilson," she said, her voice no longer weak but ringing out with the force of a clarion call, clear and cold as steel. "Your concern is touching." The entire room was frozen, a sea of bewildered faces. Carter stared at her, his smug expression melting into confusion and dawning horror. She picked up the small remote for the presentation screen. "Before the board votes on my health," she announced, her voice resonating with power, I believe it's only fair that we should all be privy to the full medical picture. There are a few other records we should review." She clicked the button. The screen behind them, which had been showing the Sterling Industries logo, flickered to life. The first slide showed her official falsified medical report, the one authored by Dr. Patterson. "This," Victoria said calmly, "is the story you have been told. The story of a stressed, overworked executive." She clicked again. The screen changed. A new report appeared, stamped with the letterhead of the Philadelphia clinic and showing perfectly normal blood chemistry, except for one highlighted line. "Digoxin level 3.5 ng/ml lethal." And this, Victoria's voice dropped deadly serious, "is the truth." A wave of murmurs and shouts swept through the ballroom. Dr. Patterson had gone white as a sheet, looking as though he might faint. Victoria was just getting started. Click. An email from Carter to Patterson appeared on the screen. His threats in black and white for all to see. Click. The dosage calendar. Click. A complex financial chart showing the timeline of Blackwood Holdings stock purchases, perfectly mirroring the dates of her medical episodes. The evidence was absolute. The narrative was undeniable. Carter's face had collapsed into a mask of pure animalistic panic. He was trapped, exposed, and utterly ruined in front of the entire world. Victoria turned to look at him, her eyes devoid of all emotion save for a cold, final judgment. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "perhaps you would like to explain these discrepancies to the board and to the FBI agents who are waiting for you in the lobby." For one stretched, silent second, Wilson Carter stood frozen, a statue of hubris shattered. Then the facade broke, and the desperate animal beneath took over. He let out a choked, inarticulate cry of rage and terror. He shoved past Victoria, stumbling off the stage. He ignored the shouts, the pointing fingers, the flashing cameras of the financial press. He sprinted the short distance to the ballroom's main entrance, to the wall where the emergency systems were housed. He smashed the glass cover of the fire alarm with his fist. An ear-splitting alarm began to shriek. Red emergency strobes flashed, plunging the room into a pulsating, disorienting chaos. Panic erupted in the crowd as people began to stand and shout their fear and confusion, a perfect smokescreen for a desperate man's escape. The world dissolved into a cacophony of shrieking alarms and pulsating red light. Panic, a contagious beast, leaped into the crowd. People surged to their feet, shouting in confusion, the orderly shareholders' meeting devolving into a frantic shoving mob. In the heart of the chaos, Wilson Carter was a shark in a feeding frenzy, using the pandemonium as his cover, shouldering his way through the panicked throngs toward the exit. The FBI agents stationed in the lobby were instantly swamped, their primary focus shifting from a single arrest to controlling a potential stampede. James Washington, however, remained a fixed point in the swirling storm. He stood by the service exit, an island of preternatural calm. He knew Carter. He knew the man's arrogance and his meticulous nature. Carter wasn't running from the building. He was running to something inside it. While his digital world was collapsing on the ballroom screen, there was one piece of his conspiracy that would be physical. A backup. A ledger. Something he could hold in his hand, the one thing he was too paranoid to commit to any network. And it would be in the one place he considered his impregnable fortress, his office on the 20th floor. As Carter fought the tide of humanity toward the main elevators, James slipped through the service door he was guarding. He didn't run. He moved with a quiet, efficient purpose through the clean, sterile-smelling back corridors of the hotel, a map of the building's secret passages etched in his mind from years of pushing a cart through them. He got to the service elevator, the rattling cage that had started this journey, and pressed the button for the 20th floor. He would get there before Carter. He would cut him off at the pass. The 20th floor was in a similar state of disarray. The blaring alarm had sent employees streaming out of their offices, heading for the emergency stairwells. James navigated the stream of fleeing workers, his gray uniform a passport of invisibility. He reached the corridor leading to Carter's office and waited in the alcove of a copy room, his cleaning cart positioned nearby like a loyal waiting soldier. Seconds later, Carter burst through the stairwell door at the far end of the hall, breathing heavily, his perfect suit now disheveled. He scanned the empty corridor, a look of grim triumph on his face. He thought he was in the clear. He straightened his tie, his composure returning, and strode toward his office. Then he saw James. James stepped out of the alcove, blocking the path to the office door. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his presence more imposing than any physical threat. Carter stopped dead, his face contorting from surprise into a mask of pure, undiluted rage. "You," He snarled, his voice a low growl. "Get out of my way, you old fool. This doesn't concern you anymore." "I think it does." Mr. Carter James said, his voice calm and even. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to defend. "There's nowhere left to run. It's over." "It's over when I say it's over." Carter roared and lunged forward, not to attack James, but to shove him aside and get to his office door. But James had spent a lifetime understanding physics on a practical level, leverage friction momentum. He didn't try to stop the larger man's charge. Instead, he deftly sidestepped and with a practiced shove sent his heavy, fully laden cleaning cart rolling directly into Carter's path. Carter, not expecting the move, crashed into the cart. Bottles of cleaning solution clattered to the floor. As he stumbled trying to regain his balance, James calmly reached for the industrial-sized spray bottle of floor wax remover, a notoriously slick oil-based fluid. He squeezed the trigger, sending a wide, clear arc of the liquid onto the polished marble floor directly at Carter's feet. Carter's expensive leather shoes hit the invisible patch of fluid. His feet went out from under him as if he had stepped onto black ice. He flailed wildly, his arms windmilling before crashing to the floor with a heavy, ignominious thud. The contents of his pockets, including a small key for a hidden safe, skittered across the floor. Before Carter could even process what had happened, two of Victoria's loyal security guards, who had been pre-briefed and were ascending via a different stairwell, rounded the corner, followed closely by two FBI agents, their faces grim. They saw Carter on the floor, the janitor standing calmly over him, and the situation snapped into sharp, undeniable focus. "Wilson Carter, you're under arrest," one of the agents said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Carter, scrambling to get up from the slick floor, stared up at James with eyes full of venomous hatred. He had been defeated, not by guns, not by security teams, but by a bucket of spray bottle and the quiet, calculating intelligence of the man he had dismissed as a piece of furniture. The arrests were swift and decisive. Dr. Patterson was found in the now chaotic ballroom, huddled under a table, weeping hysterically. He surrendered without a word. Carter, in contrast, was defiant to the end, shouting threats and proclaiming his innocence as he was led in handcuffs through the media circus that had erupted outside the hotel. The story exploded. It was the lead item on every news channel, the front page of every paper. Janitor hero exposes plot to murder billionaire CEO. The narrative was irresistible. A working-class black janitor using medical knowledge inherited from his late wife to save the life of a powerful white executive, then single-handedly exposing a complex corporate conspiracy. James Washington became an overnight sensation. The sudden visibility was a physical shock. He tried to go home to his apartment only to find news vans camped out on his street, reporters shoving microphones in his face. He was a man who had cultivated a lifetime of invisibility, and the glare of the spotlight felt like a burn. He retreated, staying for a few days at a secure hotel provided by Victoria, feeling like a fugitive. He only spoke once to the press. Cornered by a young, tired-looking reporter who seemed more human than the others, James had simply shaken his head. "I'm not a hero," he had said, his voice quiet but firm. "I just did what my wife would have told me to do. Dorothy. She was the smart one. She was the one who saw things other people missed. This is her story, not mine." A week later, Victoria Sterling called a formal press conference. The ballroom was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was not one of fear, but of rapt anticipation. Victoria stood at the podium, no longer the frail victim, but a queen restored to her throne, radiating power and control. At her request, James stood awkwardly to the side of the stage, wearing a new ill-fitting suit he had been provided, feeling more exposed and out of place than ever before. After giving her official statement, Victoria opened the floor to questions. A reporter from a major newspaper stood up. "Ms. Sterling, can you comment on the profound betrayal by Dr. Patterson? He was your family's trusted physician for decades. How will you move forward from that?" Victoria's gaze was steady. "Dr. Patterson's fate is now in the hands of the justice system. His actions represent a betrayal not just of my family, but of every oath he ever took as a doctor." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Then her eyes shifted, finding James at the side of the stage. "But this story is not ultimately about betrayal." She continued, her voice resonating with a new, passionate conviction. "It is about integrity. It's about the person who upheld the true spirit of medicine when a licensed physician had forgotten it completely. It's about a legacy of knowledge and character that was passed from a brilliant nurse to her loving husband. She turned to James and beckoned him forward. He hesitated, then walked woodenly to her side, the roar of 100 camera shutters like machine gun fire. To honor that legacy, Victoria announced, her voice ringing with emotion. Sterling Industries is proud to announce the formation of the Dorothy Washington Foundation for Medical Ethics. With an initial endowment of $20 million, the foundation will provide full scholarships to underprivileged students who wish to pursue careers in neurology and emergency medicine. A stunned silence fell over the room, followed by a roar of applause and flashing lights. James stood frozen, his mind reeling. He heard Dorothy's name and his eyes welled up with tears. But Victoria wasn't finished. Furthermore, she declared, placing a hand on James's shoulder. The man who uncovered this plot did so by demonstrating a skill that is priceless in any corporation, the ability to see the truth that is hiding in plain sight. He saw corruption where the rest of us saw only procedure. That is a skill this company not only needs, but will now celebrate. She looked out at the sea of reporters, her face breaking into a genuine, triumphant smile. Therefore, I have created a new executive position on my senior leadership team. Please join me in welcoming James Washington, our new Director of Corporate Integrity. The world exploded in a blinding supernova of light. The reporters were on their feet, shouting his name. James stood there, blinking in the glare, a quiet man who had spent his life in the shadows, now thrust into a light so bright it was impossible to see. He could only feel its heat, and the terrifying, thrilling realization that his life of invisibility was over forever. 6 months later, James Washington sat in an office on the 26th floor, one level above the Queen's throne room. His title, Director of Corporate Integrity, was embossed in elegant silver lettering on the frosted glass door. The office itself was larger than his entire apartment. It had a panoramic corner view of the city, a vista of glass and steel and sky that he had once spent his nights meticulously cleaning from the other side. A deep-piled charcoal carpet absorbed all sound. The desk was a vast expanse of polished ebony, and James had never felt more out of place in his life. The suit he wore, a tailored Savile Row creation that had cost more than his last car, felt like a Halloween costume. The fabric was too smooth, the knot of the silk tie a constant gentle chokehold. He spent his days in meetings where a foreign language was spoken, a dialect of synergies, deliverables, optics, and leveraging core competencies. He would sit in a plush leather chair, a ghost in expensive wool, nodding along while his mind screamed in confusion. He missed the satisfying heft of his buffer, the tangible reality of a dirty floor made clean, the simple, honest ache in his muscles after a long night's work. Here the work was abstract, a shifting game of words and numbers that left him feeling hollow and useless. He was an imposter, and he felt that at any moment someone would tap him on the shoulder and hand him back his gray jumpsuit. His salvation came not from the boardroom, but from the work itself, and from the one person who understood both his old world and his new one, Marcus Johnson. Victoria, in her sweeping changes, had promoted Marcus to head of electronic and physical security. They were in a budget meeting surrounded by grim-faced executives from finance. Marcus was proposing a complete overhaul of the company's internal security protocols. The expense is simply not justifiable, the CFO, a stern man named Davenport, said dismissively. Our current systems are state-of-the-art. They're state-of-the-art for stopping outside threats, Marcus countered. But the threat we faced came from the inside. The system is blind to that. The executives murmured, unconvinced. James, who had been silent for the entire hour, cleared his throat. The room fell quiet. It was still a novelty when the janitor turned director spoke. The problem isn't just the technology, James said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of authority he didn't know he possessed. It's the people, or rather the lack of them. The night shift cleaning crews are outsourced. The company changes contractors every 6 months to save a few dollars. No one on that crew knows the building. No one knows the employees. A new face is just a new face. A threat on the inside needs a consistent, observant human presence to be detected. He leaned forward. You want to improve security? Stop rotating the cleaning and maintenance staff. Hire them as full Sterling employees. Give them benefits. Give them a reason to care about this building. A janitor who has worked on the same floor for 5 years knows things your cameras will never see. He knows the sound of the wrong footsteps. He knows when a door that's always locked is suddenly ajar. He knows when an employee who always leaves at 6 is suddenly working past midnight 3 nights in a row. You want to stop the next Wilson Carter. Trust the people you've spent a lifetime teaching yourselves to ignore. A stunned silence filled the room. Victoria, sitting at the head of the table, looked at James with a newfound respect. He wasn't just a symbol. He was a strategist with a perspective no one else in that room could ever have. The proposal was approved. It was the first time James felt he had truly earned his salary. His real purpose, however, he found in the Dorothy Washington Foundation. He insisted on being on the selection committee for the first round of scholarships, and he spent hours in his grand office reading the application essays. In the stories of these brilliant, hungry, underprivileged students, he saw himself. He saw the fire that had driven Dorothy. They were kids from forgotten neighborhoods, kids who worked 2 jobs to support their families while acing advanced calculus, kids who dreamed of curing diseases and healing people. He was the one who made the first call. The recipient was a young woman from the Bronx named Sophia Reyes. She wanted to be a neurosurgeon. When James told her she had been awarded a full 4-year scholarship to Johns Hopkins, there was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a choked sob, and then the sound of her shouting the news to her mother in Spanish. In that moment, sharing in that family's life-altering joy, James finally understood the true power of his new position. This was a legacy. This was a clean floor that would stay clean forever. But the corporate world had one more snake in its garden. Julian Thorne was a handsome, polished board member from an old money family. He had been a protege of Carter's, the one who had given Victoria the Raven pin, but he was too slick, too well connected to have been implicated in the conspiracy. He saw James as an affront, a janitor sitting in a seat that a man of his breeding and background deserved. He saw the foundation and James's new security initiatives as a wasteful drain on profits that could have been his bonus. Thorne's attack was subtle, a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. He didn't challenge James directly. Instead, he started a whispering campaign. He manipulated financial reports, cleverly burying the startup costs for James's new programs under misleading budget lines, making the Department of Corporate Integrity look like an inefficient black hole of cash. He started rumors in the executive lounge that James was in over his head, a nice story, but not a real leader. James felt the shift. He saw the cooler greetings from other executives, the skeptical questions from Davenport in the finance department. The numbers in the reports Thorne presented didn't feel right. They clashed with the reality he was building. The old James would have kept his head down, but the new James knew that a lie left unchallenged becomes the truth. He didn't fight Thorne in the boardroom. That was Thorne's territory. He would lose. So he returned to his own. He started walking the floors again after hours, not with a mop, but with a quiet, watchful eye. He didn't need bugs or cameras. He had something better, the trust of the invisible people. He had coffee in the basement with the night shift engineers. He spoke with the women who cleaned the executive suites, asking about their families, treating them as peers. And they talked. They told him about Mr. Thorne's late nights, how he was always the last to leave, how he used his personal office shredder constantly, just like Carter used to. One of the cleaners mentioned that she often found discarded documents from a risky and failing biotech startup that Thorne was personally invested in, a company that had recently put in an unsolicited proposal to Sterling Industries, a proposal that had been championed by Thorne himself. James put the pieces together. Thorne wasn't just undermining him. He was using the confusion of the departmental restructuring to siphon funds from the operational budgets, including a portion of the foundation's administrative account, to prop up his failing side project, hoping to force Sterling to acquire it and bail him out. James didn't need a spreadsheet to prove it. He compiled a simple 2-page report. It contained the discrepancies he'd found in the budget, a timeline of Thorne's late nights, and sworn notarized statements from 3 night shift employees about the documents they had seen. It was a janitor's investigation, simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. He requested a private meeting with Victoria. He laid the report on her gleaming desk without a word. She read it, her expression hardening from curiosity to cold fury. She didn't question a single word. She knew James's evidence was more reliable than any dozen forensic accountants. Julian Thorne's resignation was announced the following Monday, citing personal reasons. It was a quiet, surgical removal. James had won his first corporate battle not by learning to play the game, but by using the rules of his own. His position in the company was no longer symbolic. It was absolute. That following Saturday, a warm, clear autumn day, James drove out to the cemetery. He walked past the grand, imposing mausoleums and ornate headstones to the simple granite marker that read, Dorothy Washington. Beloved wife. A healer's hand, a lion's heart. He stood before the grave, the silence of the cemetery a comforting blanket. Hey, Dot, he said softly, the words feeling strange in the open air. It's been a while. You would not believe the last few months. He told her everything. He told her about the office on the 26th floor, about how lost and stupid he felt in the big meetings. He told her about Marcus and about Victoria. He told her about the foundation, about its name, and the pride he felt when he said it. They named it after you, honey. The Dorothy Washington Foundation. He said, his voice thick with emotion. It's for kids. Smart kids like you were. Kids who want to fix people. He reached into the pocket of his simple jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter written in a neat, youthful hand. This is from the first recipient, he said, his voice cracking. Her name is Sophia. She's going to be a brain surgeon. She said in her letter she read all about you. She said she wants to have a lion's heart just like you. He unfolded the letter and carefully placed it at the base of the headstone, weighing it down with a small, smooth stone he'd picked up along the path. He stood there for a long time, reading the student's grateful words over and over, the sunlight warming his face. A sense of profound peace settled over him, a quiet he hadn't felt since before Dorothy had died. The imposter was gone. The ghost had found his purpose. He wasn't just the keeper of his wife's memory anymore. He was the builder of her legacy, and he knew with a certainty that filled his entire soul that she would be so proud. 1 year later, the office on the 26th floor no longer felt like a costume. It felt like a command center. James Washington stood at the head of a conference table, the morning sun glinting off the skyline behind him, and he was not an imposter. He was a leader. The anonymous reporting system is flagging a potential issue in the Frankfurt division, he said, his voice calm and measured. His team, a diverse group of auditors, ethicists, and investigators he had handpicked, listened intently. The numbers on their material sourcing look too perfect. Marcus, can your team do a quiet digital audit? Look for any algorithms designed to scrub outliers from the reports. Marcus Johnson, now the company's indispensable chief of security, nodded from his seat. Already on it, James. We'll have an answer by end of day. This was the new Sterling Industries. The company's stock price had soared not just because it was profitable, but because it had become the gold standard for corporate ethics. Trust, it turned out, was the most valuable asset of all. The Washington protocols James and Marcus had designed were being studied in business schools. The culture had shifted from the top down and from the bottom up. James had made good on his promise. The cleaning, maintenance, and mailroom staff were now all full Sterling employees with benefits and a pension plan. And they had become the most effective early warning system in the entire corporation. They were no longer invisible. They were the guardians of the building's soul. Later that day, James sat at his ebony desk for a scheduled video call. A bright, smiling face popped up on his screen. It was Sophia Reyes, the first recipient of the Dorothy Washington Scholarship. She was calling from her dorm room at Johns Hopkins, posters of the Krebs cycle and human anatomy on the wall behind her. I just got my midterm grade in organic chemistry, Mr. Washington. She said, her voice buzzing with an energy that felt like it could power the entire city. An A-. The professor said it was one of the highest in the class. That's wonderful, Sophia. James said, a genuine proud smile spreading across his face. But I told you, call me James. I'm trying, she laughed. Listen, I wanted to tell you we started our unit on neurotoxicology. We were studying cardiac glycosides. I read a case study about digitalis poisoning, and I thought of your wife, of her foundation. I just wanted to say thank you again. You didn't just give me a scholarship. You gave me a purpose. I want to be a doctor like she was. They talked for a few more minutes, and after he disconnected, James swiveled his chair to look at the framed photo on his desk. It was the same one he had kept for years of Dorothy smiling on a beach, but now it was in a heavy silver frame Victoria had given him. Did you hear that? Dot, he whispered. A lion's heart. His weekly meeting with Victoria was no longer a formal report, but a conversation between friends. She walked into his office without knocking, holding 2 cups of coffee. You look pleased with yourself, she said, handing him a cup. Sophia Reyes got an A- in organic chemistry, he replied. Victoria's smile was warm and genuine. The hard, brittle CEO of the past was gone, replaced by a leader who was just as powerful, but now tempered with a wisdom and humanity she had been forced to learn. That's the best return on investment I've had all year. They sat in the comfortable armchairs by the window, the city sprawling beneath them. They talked about the business, about the foundation, about life. They were an unlikely pair, the janitor and the queen, but they had forged a bond of absolute trust, a platonic friendship built on the rubble of a shared crisis. He was her moral compass, and she was his fiercest champion. When he returned to his desk, his assistant had left the afternoon mail in a neat pile. Most of it was business, but one envelope stood out. It was cheap, thin paper with no return address, and the postmark was from a federal penitentiary in Illinois. It had been forwarded from his old apartment. His heart gave a single hard thump. He knew who it was from. He slid it open. The letter inside was from Wilson Carter. The handwriting was a furious, slashing scrawl. It was 3 pages of vitriol, a venomous tirade of a man drowning in his own narcissism. He blamed Victoria's weakness, Patterson's incompetence, the board's cowardice, the biased media. There was not a single word of remorse. It was the desperate, self-pitying rant of a fallen king who still believed in his own divinity. James read it all, his expression calm. He felt nothing. No anger, no fear, no triumph. All the power Carter had once held over him was gone, reduced to ink and cheap paper. He was about to toss the letter into the wastebasket when he saw a final scrawled sentence at the very bottom, almost an afterthought. I still don't know how you did it. I never thought a man like you could be smart. It was the closest Wilson Carter could ever come to admitting defeat. It was the confession of a man whose entire worldview, built on a pyramid of class and race and arrogance, had been shattered by the one person he had deemed worthless. James walked over to the sleek, silent, high-security shredder in the corner of his office, a part of the new protocols he had implemented, and fed the letter into it. The machine whirred softly, turning Carter's rage into meaningless confetti. The past was gone. He walked to the vast floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. It was the same view he had seen for 15 years through a film of cleaning fluid, but it was a different world. He saw the plaza below, the streams of people flowing like blood through the city's arteries. He no longer saw them as a faceless mass, the employers he served in silence. He saw individuals, each with a story, each with a purpose. He saw Marcus walking across the plaza, heading for the security center, and he raised a hand. Marcus saw him even from 26 floors down and waved back. He thought about his journey from the shadows of the service corridors to this sunlit office. He realized his past wasn't a liability he had to overcome. It was the source of all his strength. His years of invisibility had been a superpower. They had taught him to see, to listen, to understand the building and its people in a way no executive ever could. He hadn't risen from his old life. He had built his new one upon its foundations. The true view from the top, he finally understood, was not about looking down on the world. It wasn't about power or money or prestige. It was about clarity. It was the ability to see the intricate, interconnected web of humanity, and to recognize the profound worth and hidden genius in every single person, especially in the ones who walked in the shadows, the ones no one else ever bothered to see. He had not only found his voice, he had found a way to give a voice to all the other ghosts in the machine. And that was a legacy that would last forever. The story you have just experienced is a testament to a simple yet powerful truth. The most extraordinary courage can often be found in the quietest of hearts. It reminds us that a person's worth is not defined by their job title or the suit they wear, but by the content of their character and the knowledge they choose to cultivate. True intelligence is not a credential to be framed on a wall, but a tool to be used in the service of justice and compassion. James Washington's journey teaches us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is the person nobody sees coming. If this story of quiet heroism and unexpected justice has touched you, we thank you for spending your time with us. Stories like these are a celebration of the human spirit's ability to triumph over darkness. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more tales that honor the hidden heroes and the unsung victories that happen all around us every single day. Thank you for watching.